We are back with another episode of App Stories. I'm John Voorhees. Of course, I've got Federico Viticci with me, the editor-in-chief of MacStories.net. How you doing, Federico?
Hello, I'm good. How are you, John?
I'm doing really well. I should mention right off the bat that this episode is sponsored by Microsoft Lists and Privacy.com, which you'll hear about a little bit later. But first, I wanted to kind of check in with you as we do, Federico. What's going on? What's new with you?
I finally published my home screen that I've been teasing for a while, changes that I made to the home screen on my phone. And you can find an in-depth write-up in the latest issue of Mac Stories Weekly that we sent last Friday for Club Mac Stories members. It features a complete look at my Today page, the first home screen, the second home screen, and 2 additional widget pages. And this is a result of multiple weeks of basically tearing down my home screen and rebuilding it from scratch based on apps that I'm really using on a daily basis, fewer widgets, a bunch of new entries that I don't want to spoil. But yeah, it was a long process and I'm still figuring things out. Obviously, there's still a few apps that I'm not fully committed to yet, but I'm still experimenting with and playing around with. But it's basically, as I wrote in the newsletter, it's the result of taking a good hard look at the way that I use my phone, the limitations of widgets in iOS 14, and trying to account for the fact that I may be using, my phone the old-fashioned way, just by tapping icons and apps on my home screen more than I hoped I would, maybe last October when I reviewed iOS 14. So go check out the home screen article. It's 3,000 words almost. It's a long write-up for a newsletter. It's in issue 262 of Mac Stories Weekly.
Yeah, I actually like the boring approach in the sense that I feel like there's so much that I try that doesn't stick, and it's good to experiment. I'm not suggesting that it's not. But for instance, I think maybe for every 10 shortcuts that I create, maybe 2 or 3 of them stick. And that's okay. I mean, it's part of the process of figuring out what is actually going to save you time and be useful to you. But I think the same thing kind of holds true for the way you organize your phone and the way you use it. And, if this works particularly well for you, the way you work and the way you use your phone on your home, it makes sense. I mean, one thing that I've noticed is I think that something that you touched on in the story is that I've tried to move some things into folders that I've suddenly realized that I probably shouldn't have moved into folders because I'm tapping into folders way too often, right? And there's probably 3 or 4 apps that I did that with where the main reason I did it was to make more room for widgets. And I don't think that that's probably a good reason to move things into folders. So I do plan myself on pulling some of that stuff out of folders and trying to rethink it. And there's some good ideas there. A couple of things I'm gonna lift from you, and as well as a couple of apps. One of which I don't think I've ever even heard of that you sprung on me. You're always springing surprises on me, Federico. What's up with that?
I always do.
You always do.
It's one of my many qualities. I want to believe
it is. At least you're not practical joking me like you've done in the past to family members of yours and things. But at least not
exactly.
Yet.
Be grateful for that.
Exactly, so. I am. I'm very grateful. You keep me on my toes, which is a good thing.
Always. You and our readers. Always.
That's right. You would think, people who are listening to this show, that I would know what was going on at Mac Stories, but not always. Federico likes to keep a few things.
He really doesn't.
He likes to keep a couple of things under his hat at all times, and then spring them on me on a Friday morning. But yes, I have been doing some more experimenting with shortcuts and crafts because I guess it was maybe a month and a half ago that I really started trying to rethink how I deal with links. And I've talked about this a little bit here and there, but every week between the club newsletter and Mac Stories Unwind in particular, I need different lists of links of the things that have been published on Mac Stories for the preceding week in different formats. So sometimes I need a bulleted markdown list. Sometimes I just need the URLs. Sometimes I need a markdown list without the bullets. I mean, there's just a few different formats that I need for those different places. And so having found myself, tediously recreating those every week, I decided I needed to create some shortcuts. And I did that about a month and a half ago. But then I put the brakes on the project because there was a bug introduced with Craft that made it so the shortcuts weren't creating rich links in the app any longer. That has since been fixed. So if you send a URL into Craft from using a shortcuts action, it will create a rich link now. So I went back, revisited those shortcuts, recreated the shortcuts for URLs going into Craft, and then I created one that I shared with club members last week that is a way to get the URLs out of Craft documents that are, bigger documents. So for instance, our Mac Stories Unwind show notes have rich links for all the stories we're going to talk about. And I want to get those out for the show notes out of Craft, but I don't need all the other words and notes and things we have in there. So I created a shortcut that can extract just those links, and then I can create them in different formats and put them in the show notes, which has saved me a lot of time every week. So it's that's a fun one. The other thing I've been working on is kind of reevaluating Mac automation, because I had kind of fallen off the bandwagon with Mac automation to a degree. And part of that was all the different Macs I was using and updates and, apps that hadn't been updated yet. But I've been reevaluating things like Hazel, for instance. And I just tore it all down and started from scratch with the simplest of automations, which is I kind of use my downloads folder as the Mac junk drawer, because whether I'm saving an image, maybe I'm airdropping an image from my phone or my iPad onto my Mac, I'll put it there, because that's also where Safari downloads things to, whether it's like a press kit I get from a developer, or it's image assets from the Apple press site. All those kinds of things end up there. And so I just use that as the junk drawer. But as a result, it also gets really cluttered with a lot of stuff very quickly. So I just set up, the simplest Hazel rule, which I think maybe is even, they have a version of it baked into the app, which is I just have it go through, and every 30, once something's 30 days old, it just goes straight to the trash. And it's not everything. It's zip files, DMGs, image files, MP3s, because usually when we publish an episode of a podcast, I will download it from the site just to make sure it's all working correctly. And so I end up getting a whole bunch of, episodes of app stories in my downloads folder, all those kind of things. And it just cleans it out, saves a little space on my drive. And but I'm going to go from there and do something a little more fancy than that. That's pretty pedestrian, but it kind of fits, I guess, with your iPhone home screen, in that it's just a quality of life thing. It's a very simple but tidy way to tidy up my Mac.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that approach.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Microsoft Lists, your smart information tracking app in Microsoft 365. Keeping track of information is something that is in everybody's job description these days. It's really quite simple. Writing things down is what works for simple lists. But it's easy to get overwhelmed when you need to stay on top of hundreds of items and get others to pay attention and act on those items too. Microsoft Lists is a Microsoft 365 app that helps you easily track information and organize your work. Lists are simple, smart, and flexible, so you can stay on top of what matters most to you and your team. Track issues, assets, routines, contacts, inventory, and a whole lot more using customizable views and smart rules and alerts to keep everyone in sync. There are ready-made templates to get you started, and you can quickly start lists online on the new mobile app for iOS and directly within Microsoft Teams. Also, because it's part of Microsoft 365, you can rely on enterprise-ready security and compliance. I'm a big believer in writing things down, but just as important is having a system that's accessible, which is one of Microsoft Lists' greatest strengths. I also like that Microsoft Lists is flexible, integrates with 365, and has collaboration tools for working with others. So many lists are about tracking lists of information that fall into narrow categories. Microsoft Lists' strength is that it brings all of these different types of lists into one unified, well-organized place where it can be shared and works in tandem with your other 365 apps. The iOS app has a colorful, clear UI. It supports dark mode, lets you scan QR codes and add photos to lists, and it has a strong emphasis on enterprise-grade security, making it a great choice for your work needs. Your lists just got a whole lot smarter. Get more done with Microsoft Lists. Go to aka.ms/MSLists for more information, videos, demos, blogs, and more. Again, that URL, which I'll put in the show notes, is aka.ms/MSLists. Make lists and let it flow. Our thanks to Microsoft Lists for their support of App Stories.
Okay, so let's talk about today's topic, which is newsletters. So this is something pretty generic. However, there's a bunch of different ways that I've been consuming, as people say, newsletters over the past year. That I think makes the whole setup sort of fascinating to discuss on App Stories because of the different tools that have surfaced over the past couple of years for a bunch of different reasons. I think really the main driver behind the rise of newsletters. I mean, we as a company, we have one,
Right.
and so speaking from experience, I think what we're witnessing here is the fact that more and more publications are moving to a membership-based model where they have extra content to share with their members, and a newsletter is the ideal format to monetize that extra content and to monetize that audience, which is what we've been doing, which is what other, Ben Thompson comes to mind, for example, what others have been doing with a combination of free content on a website, but additional content delivered via a newsletter. And the second driver, I think, which we're seeing more over the past year because of the pandemic, is individual writers and journalists sort of going indie and starting their own newsletters.
Right.
And there's really two main companies to mention here. The first one being Substack, and the other is Review, which was acquired by Twitter a few months ago. And I think what we're seeing here is fascinating in the context of what's going to happen down the road to newsrooms when more and more journalists will likely try either a combination of having their own newsletter on something like Substack, but also monetizing their followers via something like super follows on Twitter, which is a new feature that Twitter is rolling out, which will allow you to effectively become, to back an individual Twitter user in exchange for exclusive tweets and additional content on Twitter.
Let me stop you there for 1 second, because I want to ask you what you think about Substack. Because one thing that I find unusual about Substack is that it's so easy to put together a subscription service with an email between things like Memberful and MailChimp and a bunch of other competitors to MailChimp and that kind of thing, that I find it a little odd that Substack has taken off so much. I guess it's just that it's so easy to get started. It's even easier, and you don't have to sign up for like a Stripe account and stuff like that too, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's part of the appeal of Substack. Obviously, I don't publish on Substack, so I have no idea how the backend works.
Right.
But for what I'm seeing so far as a user, I think first of all, there's the same appeal that something like Medium had maybe years ago. It's really easy to get started, and it's really easy to end up to go from a blank page to a newsletter that can be delivered either via email or via web browser to people. And the second thing I believe is all the little touches that Substack offers and all the things that they take care of for you. Like for example, the whole sign up and create an account, reset your password, gift a subscription, all of these little quality of life features that with other system they would require a bit more manual work upfront, and Substack takes care of all that for you. And I think that is part of the appeal behind something like this. In addition to, again, being able to share what you write on the web as well, not just via email.
Sure.
And on the web, you get support for truncating your posts with a paywall, which again, if you just sign up for MailChimp, it's not really something that you can do.
No, that's true. And I think really Substack, they have to be watching this super follow thing very closely, because what's
Mm-hmm.
interesting to me about that is that, the thing with Substack is that if all you have is a standalone mailing list and a truncated feed on a website, it's a little hard to reach new people, I think. Whereas with Twitter, you've got the ability to use the social network itself to grow a following and maintain a following. And then if you can also plug into that a newsletter service on top of it,
Yep.
that they have with review, I think that there's a lot more potential there for it to work better for writers who want to get into doing newsletters. Because I think one of the benefits, obviously, that we have with our newsletters is that a lot of people visit Mac Stories to begin with, and that drives a lot of people to the club ultimately. And I think Twitter could do the same sort of thing with its newsletter service, whereas Substack is just kind of, it does have a web component, which I think is worth considering, but it's a little different and a little more isolated, I think, from people's followings.
Agreed. Yeah, that's exactly why I think it's important to keep an eye on what Twitter is doing, because the combination of super follows
Mm-hmm.
and having an all-in-one package that includes exclusive tweets and access to content that other followers don't have, plus a newsletter, plus maybe members only spaces on Twitter. I think that becomes a really compelling package for $5 a month if you're really into following an individual, like, I don't know, MKBHD, assuming he does a super follow program.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes a really compelling offer, to get the tweets and the spaces and the newsletter.
Right.
It's something that I would keep an eye on. And yeah, so
You'll pay for
Substack.
you're going to pay for my tweets, aren't you? You want my exclusive hot content.
No, if
don't
anything,
you?
you should pay me to keep following you.
Oh, thank you. Sure. Okay. I've been put in my place. All right. I'll let you go
Yes.
on. Go on. All right. So what else do you want to tell me about newsletters?
So all the different ways that I've been trying to read newsletters over the past year. And I wanted to start from RSS services
Mm-hmm.
that have support for newsletters. Now, this may sound counterintuitive at first, like, why would an RSS service include support for newsletters? I don't know how this started. I don't know which service was first, but I believe that Feedbin, I know, and also I believe iNoReader, which you use. You can tell me more about this in a minute.
Yep.
And other services, they now include support for essentially generating a unique email address for you. And that email address you can use to sign up for newsletters. And those newsletters, instead of being delivered into your traditional email inbox, you can have them be delivered to your RSS service of choice. So, for example, in Feedbin, once you get your unique Feedbin email address, you can switch your newsletter subscriptions to be delivered to your Feedbin account. And when they do, they just show up as articles in Feedbin alongside all of your other regular RSS sources. And you can read them in Feedbin. You can read them in compatible Feedbin clients like Reader or Lear or Fiery Feeds, Unread. All of those clients support those newsletters. When you tap on them, if you want to open the web view, you're taken to a Feedbin hosted web page. So effectively, Feedbin is doing like its own wrapping around the newsletter. So, for example, until a few months ago, I had Mac Stories Weekly delivered to my Feedbin account. And when I tapped on it to open it on the web, it didn't take me to MailChimp. It took me to something like newsletter.feedbincontent.com or something similar. So it was its own web page, which I think is a clever approach. I used this method for almost a year, and I think it's a really nice way to combine multiple sources into the same application for reading content on the web. So you can have RSS feeds and newsletters all in one using Feedbin. And John, I believe you're using iNoReader, and I guess it mostly works the same way.
Yes, I was going to say, I think it works exactly the same way. You get a unique email address that you can customize to a degree. So you can either do just one email address and use it with multiple newsletters, or you can set up a separate one for each one. Say, you'd say you could give it like the prefix Mac Stories Weekly, and then it would have the rest of it, rest of your custom custom email address after that. So you can do the same thing there. I think one of the benefits of using a service like iKnowReader is that it has a lot of other bells and whistles that you can then integrate with your newsletters. For instance, you can get alerts when they come in, or you can run rules and save searches against the newsletters just like you do an RSS feed, which is something that I don't do, but it's available. I mean, I've got probably 4 or 5 newsletters that I follow in RSS. That's where I've been doing it a lot. I mean, you're going to tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with Hey, and I've started to move some of mine there because I just, I moved everything to RSS because I just had such a big email problem that I didn't want the newsletters coming in there because they just got lost. Now you can always do rules and file things in folders and read your newsletters that way, but I found that RSS, where I was already doing most of my reading anyway, was a great solution. The only downside I'd say is that sometimes those wrapped newsletters in a service like iKnowReader, this formatting's maybe not the greatest sometimes, but usually if it's a service like MailChimp, for instance, which we use for Mac Stories Weekly, there's a link in the newsletter and you can just tap on that if you want and go to that version, which is what I do when I get one that's kind of mangled a little bit by the RSS service. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Privacy.com. Privacy is a tool that makes it easy to manage your financial life online while keeping your most important information secure. By generating virtual card numbers, Privacy masks your bank information, so you never have to worry about giving it out to people you don't know online. Take back control of your payments. Decide who can charge your card, how much, and how often. And you can close the card at any time. Privacy enables you to make key financial decisions on your own. Plus, you can make sure that you're never accidentally billed twice or upgraded to a service you didn't consent to. Just set a spending limit to what you should be paying for the service per month so that you can catch when you're overcharged and won't need to jump through a bunch of difficult customer service hoops. Simply pause your Privacy card and they'll block the charges for you. And Privacy has partnered with the good folks at 1Password. You can create, use, and save Privacy cards directly within your 1Password dashboard. All virtual cards that are created in 1Password will have the same security benefits as your other Privacy cards. Plus, you can set spending limits, create single-use or merchant-locked cards whenever you want. This service is terrific. Over the past year, when I've been stuck at home, I've tried to do as much of our family's shopping online as possible. But that's also meant turning over my banking details to more companies online, including ones that I'm not that familiar with, which is something I'm not super comfortable doing always. Privacy's virtual cards solve that problem by putting you in control of how much you can be charged and when, providing peace of mind when you need it the most. If you shop online, and really, who doesn't these days, you really need to try Privacy's cards. Head on over to privacy.com/appstories and sign up for an account today. New customers will automatically get $5 to spend on their first purchase. Again, that URL is privacy.com/appstories. Go there now to sign up and get $5 to spend on your first purchase for all new customers. Our thanks to Privacy for their support of the show.
So the other approach is just to use email clients, right? And there's 2 different ways that I want to talk about this. The first one is you can obviously use any email client, and either create a folder, or my approach until a couple of years ago to use SaneBox, which is a sponsor of the show, has been a sponsor of this show before, but it's genuinely like a really good service that I used myself. And SaneBox, what you can do is you can configure a folder called the Sane News folder, where you can teach the service that all newsletters should be automatically filed into that service, into that folder. And the upside of using something like SaneBox is that it's a server-side addition to your email account. So it works with any email service. It works with any email client. So even if you want to switch between multiple email applications, SaneBox works in the cloud and it's going to keep working. So you can have all of your newsletters be delivered into the Sane News folder, which becomes sort of like a log of all the newsletters that you've received. which is a really, I think it's the better approach. Don't have, I would recommend against having newsletters end up in your main, into your
Right.
primary inbox. Lately, though, over the past 4 months, almost 3 months, we've been using Hey at Mac Stories. And John, you also have a personal Hey account.
Yes.
And Hey deals with newsletters in its own way. They have this section of the app. One of the three core sections of Hey. They have the inbox, which is a silly name. They have the paper trail, which is where all kind of receipts and everything else goes, basically, at least the way I see it. And then they have the feed, and the feed is it's a section dedicated to newsletters and newsletter like communications, and it's a chronological list of messages, right? It's an endless scrolling list of newsletters that you've received, and they are displayed a little differently than messages in the paper trail or the inbox, in that the newsletter is sort of expanded by default. So you see a little preview of each newsletter. And then there's a button that says open message, and you can
Right.
open the full message and the full newsletter. But it's basically like, it's called the feed because it feels like scrolling a Twitter feed. You see the reverse chronological list of newsletters from the latest to the oldest ones that you received. And you can preview sort of like a small section of a newsletter, and if you want to read it, you can expand it. It's an interesting approach. I think I like it, especially because it ties in well with the overall and really peculiar structure of Hey, but it works well for me. It supports, obviously, you can decide on a per contact basis to enable notifications. You can obviously you can share a newsletter with somebody else. I like the approach, and I have cut down on the individual newsletters that I receive for reasons that I will cover in a minute. But the very few ones that I still do receive, I have them all end up in the feed, and it works well for me.
Yeah, I've been enjoying it too, and I think of it a little bit like Twitter, I guess, but also like reading a blog where there's a
Yeah.
more link at the bottom too. And it's, I guess, the important thing to realize about the feed and Hey is that only things that you tell Hey to put there go there. So it's completely up to you. You can send your newsletters there, but you can also send. I send things in there like there. I don't like getting a lot of email from various companies, but there are some companies that I buy from regularly, where they'll send out an email maybe once a month or something like that with their latest products or whatever it happens to be. I'll send those in there so I can just kind of browse through and see if there's anything interesting to me. But yeah, it makes it ends up being kind of an interesting place to go and just browse occasionally. But I don't put anything in there that I need to see right away. It's the kind of place where if I have a little spare time every 2 or 3 days, I'll pop in there and see what's accumulated.
So the reason why I don't have individual newsletters coming into my feed anymore, it's because, and I hinted at this on this week's episode of Connected.
Mm-hmm.
I signed up, and I'm now using this service called Mailbrew. Now, Mailbrew is an interesting service that's been around for a couple of years. It's made in Italy. I should have checked it out before. Somehow it always flew under my radar for reasons that I don't fully understand. But it's one of the things that I discovered recently, and I'm in love with it. So the idea of Mailbrew is it's a service that can prepare these daily digests for you that can be consumed on the web or delivered as a newsletter. And what's really peculiar about it is that this digest, you can fully customize it by way of picking one of the multiple integrations that Mailbrew has. So you effectively put together a custom newsletter for yourself that contains updates from a variety of sources. You can, for example, let me take a look at the full list of integrations in Mailbrew. So you can pick newsletters, you can pick updates from a subreddit, YouTube channels, RSS feeds, all kinds of content from Twitter, from the timeline to lists to top links, product hunt, calendar events, your highlights from Readwise, stocks if you're that kind of person. And you can mix and match all of these sources together and you can customize the order that they appear in the Mailbrew Digest. And each day you set a schedule, and you're like, okay, every day at 10 a.m., or if you're like me at 2:30 a.m., send me this digest that contains all the latest or the most popular updates from these specific sources. And the reason I love it is really twofold at this point. One, this service, because of a beta feature that they rolled out a few days ago, and I believe it's launching publicly in the near future, it solved my problem of being able to see in a single place the tweets that my friends liked on Twitter. I tweeted about this a couple of weeks ago, and the Mailbrew developers were quick to tell me, look, we're going to work on implementing this feature if you want to check it out. And every day I have this list called friends on Twitter, which is my closest friends, basically, people that I know, and people that I know that have also good taste in liking interesting things, from articles to funny tweets to videos, all kinds of stuff. And every day I noticed about myself that I was manually opening each of those profiles, and I didn't want to look at their tweets. I wanted to look at their likes, the tweets that they hit the love, the heart button on.
Right.
And I was doing all that manually for like 10 to 15 accounts. And in Mailbrew, with this feature that is now in beta, and again, it's not available in the public version yet, it's coming soon, I hope, I can now get a digest of all those likes from my friends list on Twitter. Similarly, a feature that they rolled out publicly, so this everyone can use, a few days ago, is you can get the top links from your timeline at the end of the day. So this, for me, reduces the pressure of having to spend time on Twitter because maybe I'm missing something that everybody's talking about. Because at the end of the day, I get a summary of the top links that were shared in my timeline from the previous 24 hours. And that is a really good way to complement the home timeline of Twitter, the algorithmic timeline.
Right.
Because between the top links and the algorithmic timeline in the official Twitter app, I can get a good sense of stuff that I missed if I was not on Twitter during the day. The second reason why I'm loving Mailbrew is I can get all my newsletters delivered to a single Mailbrew email address, and these newsletters show up as clickable links in the Mailbrew Digest. There's a section called the inbox, and this is where I get, for example, the Chorus FM newsletter, the Excellent Platformer newsletter by Casey Newton, which is also a Substack one, the Pitchfork newsletter, or the stuff that I get, all the newsletters that I signed up for, now they all get delivered to my Mailbrew address. And so at the end of the day, I can just go there, open them. I can read them in line because they have their own text view for newsletters, but I can also open them in Safari View Controller. And I don't use this feature myself, but you can also use Mailbrew as a read later service. They have their own shortcut for saving links to Mailbrew, and they have their own saved section where you can use it as a lightweight read later app.
Right.
But I prefer to use something else. Go check out, again, my home screen from
Yes.
Mac Stories Weekly if you want to see what I'm using now. So this personalization and the fact that you can create multiple digests, send them at different times of the day. So maybe you want to get a morning one with certain sources, and maybe you want to get an evening one with, fun sources like YouTube and Reddit, to unwind before going to sleep. That is really fascinating. And lastly, I want to mention it's super polished, like visually speaking. The UI is beautiful.
Really nice.
It looks really nice. The only downside is they don't have a native iOS app for now. I believe they're working on it, and I really hope they launch it at some point this year. The web app is really nice. I added it as a web app to my home screen. It launches in full screen. It looks very nice. It's responsive. It's fast. But I would still prefer a native
Sure.
app. But overall, it's one of those things that I know I'm right because it's been over a week that I've been using Mailbrew, and it's already become like something that I expect to receive at the end of the day. Like, it's a nice thing to see that digest pop up at 2:30 a.m. for me. And I signed up for a year, and so I'm gonna keep using it. It's really well done. It's made in Italy, which makes me proud. Doesn't happen often, unfortunately. But yeah, this is what I'm using now.
There are a lot of good developers in Italy. I come across more than
There
I think
are,
I would
unfortunately,
expect.
a lot of them, they work for bigger companies and agencies that,
That's true.
you
But
know,
we've still got, our friends at Shiny Frog making Bear and a
absolutely.
bunch of others we've run
Thankfully,
into.
we have exceptions.
We do. We
Thankfully.
do have exceptions. That's really interesting to hear, Federico, because I've been aware of Mailbrew for a long time, and I've looked at it from time to time. And I think my greatest hesitation has always been, why would I want all of that in my email? And it's probably worth another look from my perspective, partly because I've kind of got my email, I think, sort of figured out for the time being, and I'm more on top of it. So I could this would probably work. But yeah, I've never really thought about bringing all those different sources together in one digest in one place. And I do check an awful lot of things during the course of a day, whether it's Twitter or Reddit or various sites, and a lot of that now is integrated into Mailbrew, and I there is, I think, some appeal to having it all organized in a neat and tidy and nice looking way for you, and I can see the appeal of that. Maybe I should give it another spin as well.
And lastly, we talked about Substack at the beginning of the episode. It's worth mentioning again that Substack, they rolled out as a beta, I guess, on the web.
Yeah, I think that's right.
A web app called Substack Reader. Now, this is a sort of a hybrid approach that I'm not fully sold on. I don't think it's a good idea, but it's interesting regardless, and we're going to mention it. Substack Reader, it's a mix of, it lets you read newsletters, but it also lets you add traditional RSS feeds. So it's like an RSS client, but it's only on the web. And it's a single, like it's a unified dashboard for all of your Substack newsletters, but you can also add RSS feeds from blogs that you want to follow. Now, it's only on the web for now. This should really be on iPad and iPhone as a native app.
Yeah.
And it's maybe could have my attention. What's interesting about it is the inclusion of a Discover section, which I think it's right now that's one of the weakest points of the Substack experience, and why I'm keeping an eye on Twitter's plans for newsletters. Because what I'm finding difficult about Substack is discovering great writers that match my interests.
Right.
The Discover section doesn't really work for me right now, and I have high hopes for Twitter in terms of, because of their knowledge graph and because they know my interests, right? Because I see, for example, those topics pop up in my Twitter timeline from time to time. I wonder if Twitter could do a better job at saying, hey, you like the newsletter by Casey Newton, then maybe you're also going to like these writers, which is not something that Substack is doing at the moment. So the Discover section could be interesting, feels pretty much as useless to me as a reader. Again, I'm not a creator, as the Medium homepage. Basically.
Right, yeah.
You know, it's just a bunch of recommendations all over the place.
Sure, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that approach, having a web-based RSS reader, is very old school. That reminds me of the old days with Google Reader and some of the other services that popped up around that time that all kind of have gone away at one time or another. And now, I mean, it really is cutting across the grain, because of what we're seeing more often than not now are RSS clients that don't even require a web backend. They're just using like iCloud to sync the feeds between instances of the app, native app on different platforms. And I really like that approach. I think it's pretty neat. Yep. But yeah, that's interesting. Well, Federico, this is a lot to digest and think about. I think you've done a lot more with newsletters than I have at least over the past few months. Now that I'm kind of on top of my email, maybe I need to sign up for some newsletters and inundate myself with more email and see if I can handle it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank our two sponsors again for this episode, and that is Microsoft Lists and Privacy. You can find me and Federico over at macstories.net and Club Mac Stories. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHN VOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.